And we're live.
Good evening, everybody. Call to order. Let's have the pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everybody. Amy, how about a roll call, please?
Director Asner. Director Byers. Here. Director Faulkner.
Here.
Director Hudson. Here. Director Moeller. Vice President Petroff. Here. And President Cuneo.
Here. Before we go any further, I know that Scott is on vacation. Would someone like to make a motion to excuse him? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. I am surprised Dr. Asner is here. I'm guessing at some point he'll be here. We'll have him also on the agenda this year. All right. There are no public comments. Would someone like to make a motion for approval of the agenda? Tiffany?
Oh, no. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Superintendent's report, SSD schools and technical and high schools only.
All right, we have 3 short reports tonight. The first one will be presented by Dr. Kelly Grigsby and Mr. Kevin Andrews. They're going to update the board on reopening of our SSD school programs and technical high schools.
Good evening, Dr. Cuneo, Vice President Petroff, Board of Directors, Dr. Noonan. Thank you for having us. I'm Kelly Grigsby. I'm the Executive Director for Schools and Programs.
Kevin Andrews, Executive Director of Career and Technical Education and College and Career Readiness.
What? Today we'll be presenting our instructional plans to reopen in August or return to school in August. Next slide. For our SSD schools and our Bridges program and also our vocational school program, which is GSP, all students will return to in-person learning. We will be 100% in-person learning. Students who require medical homebound for a medical condition that prevents them from returning in person, we will provide that through our medical homebound department. Requests for virtual learning will also be considered through the IEP process, and then when appropriate for the students learning, we will work with their home school district to explore the virtual learning option. With regard to the courts program, we will continue, that's JDC and Lakeside. We'll continue in-person learning. They are currently in session. We will continue to collaborate with courts, staff, and Marygrove staff regarding closure if they're ever needed again. One note on that is that over the summer, the way we handled masking was students and staff were all masked. Staff were required to wear masks. In the presence of students, when working directly with students, they were not required to wear masks if vaccinated and they were alone or with other staff. We plan to continue that practice when we reopen schools in August.
All right, so for the technical high schools, as we discussed earlier in the spring, for our junior and senior programs, they will only have the option to attend in person. Based off the nature of our programming, in-person instruction really is the most beneficial for the types of programs we offer at North and South Tech. Students and families seeking a virtual option will access that through their home high school. Sophomore exploration program at North Tech. So the exception is most sophomores will be attending in person. We will be offering a limited virtual option for sophomores who are attending virtually at their sending high schools. Right now, we're working with each of our partner districts to find out what their plan for virtual learning, if they're going to offer one, is going to look like. So it's going to vary a little bit from high school to high school if students have the option to attend virtually at their sending school. The reason we want to put this option out there is transportation is a logistical challenge if they're virtual at their home high school and then trying to access in person at North Tech. So we wanted to create a bridge for those students just in that sophomore exploration program because we did have success with a virtual option last year in that program. Next slide. So Dr. Grigsby and I have been working on updating our entry plans with our nursing staff at the district, and so we're going to give you a few updates on some pieces with our entry plans. Next slide. So guidance from DESE. So we had to develop a document which is called the Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services Plan. Just rolls right off the tongue. It's a part of the ESSER funds that we've received. And so all districts in the state must have plans in place for the 2021-22 school year. And those initial plans, recognizing this is a draft and will continue to evolve, had to be online by July 23rd of 2021. So we met that deadline. We had plans for each of our buildings online by that June 23rd deadline. DESE outlined 8 elements that have to be included in every plan. That includes things like masking, physical distancing, social distancing, contact tracing, those pieces. In the plans that we had throughout all of last school year, we met 7 of those 8 elements. So almost all of the required elements were already a part of our plans. Next slide. And so additions, so we added language about how the district is going to promote vaccination opportunities. That was the one piece that was missing from our plan, was when we wrote our plans, vaccination wasn't really even on the table yet for our students and staff. Now the state wants us to talk about how are we going to promote vaccination amongst our students as they become eligible, as well as with our staff. So we added language about the efforts that we've already done and the things that we're going to continue to do to educate individuals about vaccinations. We also added a process for accommodations for students who cannot abide by the plan. As Dr. Grigsby mentioned, masking for students who are not able to mask, we're going to talk about, we had a little more detail about how we handle those situations on a case-by-case basis. We also made a couple revisions. We removed temperature screening for students, staff, and visitors. This was especially challenging in the winter when we're trying to do that outside and it's 32 degrees. Temperature screening was not a great science outdoors. We adjusted the staff screening process to mirror our process for students, which involves self-screening before coming. If you're sick, stay home. SSD will continue to follow the CDC's and St. Louis County guidelines for schools regarding masking and distancing. So because the CDC guidance currently says that students, most of them are not eligible for vaccination, so we should assume that students are not vaccinated, and so we should continue to have universal masking in place. So that is our plan. It's possible at times where CDC guidance might differ from St. Louis County guidance. We have to follow St. Louis County guidelines, so the district will continue to follow the more restrictive of the guidelines that are out there. So oftentimes CDC and St. Louis County are the same. When there's disagreement, we're going to go with whatever the more restrictive option is of the options that are out there.
I have 2 controversial questions, if that's
Sure.
right.
Yeah.
First of all, can the district require staff be vaccinated for COVID-19?
So to my knowledge, we're not able to require staff to be, but that would be a question for our attorneys more so than Dr. Grigsby and I.
So another question.
Yeah.
Can I comment on your question?
Yes, please.
We had talked about, just briefly, about the possibility of looking at that policy that expired, like June 30th, on that. And talking about whether, in fact, if you are not vaccinated and you get COVID, you still get the same amount of time off. And we're changing. So we thought we'd take that to the policy committee, and 3 here will be the ones that will be looking.
And then the second, more controversial question, can the district require the students to be vaccinated?
I was going to get the same answer from you. Yeah, that's something that we would need to defer to. I can tell you one note that we are encountering, especially at the technical high schools, is many of our clinical sites. So we do rotations at the hospital setting, BJC, St. Luke's, Mercy. We've already got notification from all 3 of those hospital groups that if we plan to have students participate in clinicals, they'll be required to be vaccinated to enter those facilities. Long-term care facilities, we're not seeing the same firm stance on vaccinating that we are in the hospital systems. I think more of that has to do just with staffing levels. They need people, and so they don't have the luxury to turn people away if they're not willing to get vaccinated. And the high concentration of vaccinated individuals in the long-term care facilities.
We also have requirements at some of our vocational skills program sites that students are vaccinated.
Question I have is regarding what you mentioned about our difficulties currently with transportation. specifically, is that because
Yep, so,
we've had a reduction of people desiring to drive our buses, or?
so our issue is more of just the added challenge of if we're picking up and dropping off, so normally a half-day student would either be picked up from their high school midday and brought to the technical high school, and we transport them home, or they'd come to us in the morning, we'd pick them up from a stop near their house, and then in the middle of the day, we'd bring them back to their high school. If they're a virtual student at their home high school, so let's say a student is virtual at Jennings, we go to drop them back off at Jennings at the midday. Well, Jennings doesn't have anywhere for them to be in their building. They're not assigned to be anywhere. That student needs to then get home, and so getting them from the high school back home can be the challenge, or vice versa. We might need to pick them up midday at 11 a.m. at Jennings, and the family says, well, we just don't have a way to get them there at 11 a.m. for a bus to pick them up, and then we don't have the capacity to run additional buses to pick those students up wherever they might be. Especially take a large district like a Hazelwood, there's a lot of geographic distribution where you might have 10 virtual students, but one will be in Spanish Lake, and then the other one's going to be in Hazelwood, and then another one is going to be somewhere else in the district. And so trying to route that efficiently just doesn't work. And so that's why we wanted to give those students who are choosing virtual an added layer of flexibility, and to the extent that we can. That, and we did have some pretty good success with the virtual sophomore exploration program. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just have a couple. First off, thank you for that presentation. That was really helpful to hear. And I applaud you for trying to get our students back in person. For families who the virtual option perhaps works better for their student, what response are you hearing from them? They want to make sure that we're listening to all the voices of our families.
I have not received any calls indicating that families want a virtual option.
Okay.
I suspect that we may get some feedback from families once our safe reentry information is posted and disseminated, and back to school information is being sent currently by schools. And we will, again, kind of establish the fact that we'll have to work. We're operating from an idea that if our students require enough intervention outside of the scope of a traditional or their partner district school, then the best place for them to receive that really is in person. If they can benefit from virtual for their learning piece, then we will absolutely work with those home districts to see if that's an option and support them in their home districts in doing that.
So maybe as you're getting feedback, you bring it back to us.
Sure.
Second question is, you made a comment that so many of our students can't be vaccinated. But in our high school and middle school population, they all be vaccinated, unless it's for religious or professional reasons. So are we going to continue the universal masking policy there? We have both staff and students who can be vaccinated.
Yeah, so at this point, our plan is to start most restrictive. It's easier to peel back as you get going than trying to add in midstream. So it'd be easier to start the year with universal masking, and then if we decide, you know what, we can loosen that, that's a lot easier than, say, mid-September. We decide, you know what, based off the Delta variant, we need to move to universal masking. It's harder to get it off the ground midstream. The other piece of the puzzle that we were factoring in is for a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, that parent is the one that's going to have to control whether or not that student is able to get vaccinated. So you may have a student that absolutely wants to be vaccinated, but their family is preventing that, and so we don't want that to impact a student's ability to access our programming. And we're also concerned about that peer pressure piece as well, as if we have some students in the classroom who are masked and some students who are not, and then those students who are not vaccinated removing masks, it's easier just to have a universal masking in place. We also are looking at the St. Louis County, as well as the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, does allow a modified quarantine protocol if you have a masking mandate in place, which would mean that if a student was a close contact but both individuals were masked, then they would be able to stay in the learning environment. They would need to quarantine at home, but in schools where our transmission rate was very low, they would be allowed to be in school. And so if we wanted to pursue modified quarantine, we would need to have a masking policy in place as well. So that's another advantage, is that gives us that option if we choose to implement it to do modified quarantine.
How would we pursue the modified quarantine?
Yes. So if we choose to do the modified quarantine option, we'd have a universal masking mandate in place. So students would have to wear a mask at all times in the building except for when they are eating. And then if a student is identified as a close contact, they would get specific communication from us that would say, you're allowed to come to school, but then outside of school, you would still need to quarantine. And then while you're in the school setting, still all of the same policies are in play. If you wear a mask while you're here, you maintain 6-foot social distancing, all of those pieces. There are a number of districts in St. Charles County that implemented the modified quarantine, and they didn't see a change in what their transmission rate was. And that was something we saw over the course of the school year. We quarantined a lot of students, but as far as additional positive cases, we had very, very few. We quarantined hundreds, and then the number of positive cases as a result of school transmission, you could count on one hand.
I think that the goal should be if we're going to go with
Agreed.
It could be a little trickier for SSD schools because the mask compliance is significantly lower and mask tolerance is lower. So we are definitely talking about that, whether that's an option. It's not as strong of an option as it is at our tech schools.
I have a question. For the upcoming school year, will the lunches and other such activities still be in the classroom, not in those rooms?
So we are providing the option to schools to determine, our schools to have some flexibility in that. They believe they can safely provide students access to the cafeteria to have lunches in the cafeteria, and we're all in favor of that. If they feel based on distancing and crowdedness and safety that students need to continue to eat in the classroom, then they'll continue to eat in the classroom. So we're not as a district saying everybody's going to do this. We're scaling back significantly on our reentry plans. We're going to have one document that covers all of our schools. Should only be a page to a page and a half, and meals are included in there, and it really does give flexibility to the site administrator.
Okay.
Any other questions? Just one quick procedural type thing. Could we put in that Dr. Asner is here, please?
Yes.
I know he asked a question, and it's going to be on the record, but I don't want the record screwed up. All right, thank you. And our next is on the workforce update.
All right. Our annual workforce update to the board every July. We try to give them an update on where we are for starting of school. And then we also do another workforce update in February, and that's more about the hiring practices, and that really looks at the equity in them. Director Dan Kelly will be presenting for improved mastectomy vacation.
Good evening, Board President Dr. Cuneo, Board Vice President Petroff, Board of Directors, Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Keenan. My name is Dan Kelly, Director of Human Resources, and I'm here to give you a workforce update. Next slide, please. So we've been to some position updates. Next slide, please. So when we really look at some instructional positions, constitutes job changes. So job changes would be one position to another. So for instance, a teacher to administrator, para to a teacher. So we've roughly hired 38 of our current paras to teachers. Technically 39, hired one this morning. We have promoted 9 teachers to administrators. And then through the process, we've also hired 11 teachers to instructional coaches. When we look at new positions that were added, we added 44 teacher positions, 3.4 speech-language pathologists, 5 social workers, 6.6 OTs, PTs, 7 instructional coaches, a facilitator, as you can see, 6 EPSs, and then we did add 5 paraprofessionals for a total of 78 instructional positions that we added for this upcoming school year. Next slide, please. We did add 2 maintenance positions, a position at the distribution center. We went ahead and added an ABA administrator, and then we also added 11 ABA associate positions. Next slide, please. For January through April and May, our internal staff have the opportunity to apply for what we would call a transfer. So it runs different cycles for the teachers and paras, but nonetheless from January through May, internal staff have the opportunity to apply. So for instance, our teacher data shows that we had 72 positions available and 33 positions teachers were awarded transfers. 49 paraprofessional positions were available for transfer, 24 positions paraprofessionals were granted transfers. And then our student support services 43 positions were available, with 25 teacher-level staff being awarded transfers. Slide, please. So kind of here with the hiring, kind of where we're at through July when we submitted this report. Next slide, please. So on the administrative side, we've hired a principal, 13 special education directors, 1 assistant director, 1 assistant principal, 12 special education coordinators, 7 effective practice specialists. When we look at our vacancy data for our administrative side, principal director vacancies were fully staffed. We currently have 1 assistant principal vacancy at New Owner High School. Next slide, please. So kind of when we look at our hiring, going back from January through now, we've hired 215 teachers, 17 instructional coaches. And then on the vacancy side, for our teacher level, we do have 1 instructional coach vacancy that kind of came recently. That number of 20 has been reduced a little bit since the time we submitted it. So Normandy and Hazelwood continue to have 4. Ferguson-Florissant has 2 vacant positions. University City's down to 1. Rockwood's down to 1. Rittner filled their last position. Lindbergh is staffed. There's early childhood is staffed. We're working on what that position looks like. It's more of an instructional support position. The SSD schools are staffed. Hancock is staffed. And Parkway has 1 position at the elementary level. That's kind of up to date through today.
So we have 12 positions still open. That's
I trust your math, yes, sir.
possibility of that being done by 10 school districts.
I will say that there are, on the teacher side, there's probably 7 or 8 candidates being actively interviewed. We have been getting recently 1 or 2 move-ins, so people that move into the state of Missouri for whatever reason. So we're on those people pretty quickly in terms of reaching out to them, making connections, finding out what area they want to teach at, what level, trying to get some information so that we can streamline and get that information out as quickly as we can. So, for instance, we've had 3 move in within the last week and a half, and they're actively interviewing. I'm an optimist. I'd like to think that we can do it.
Thank you.
You know, see.
I think it's quite amazing that, you know, to go from 215 to down to less than, like 12.
I mean, there's a lot of great people in HR that are processing as quickly as they can, and it's amazing to see. I mean, obviously we'd like to be fully staffed at this point. We're not, but I think we're moving in that direction.
Thank you.
Slide, please. Paraprofessional data. So we've hired 124. We're sitting at the time of this 217 vacancies. When we look at our para vacancies, districts with 5 or more, you can run through, obviously, Parkway. Parkway might be not minimizing it, but they're just under 50. But nonetheless, they still have a lot. SSD schools, Rockwood, Hazelwood, Ferguson, Rittner, Webster, Pattonville, Melville. Obviously, you can see that some significant vacancies. I'll touch on it in a little bit, but you know, we have a partnership which is really kind of new for us with Parkway next week. So it's kind of a collaborative job fair. So that's something we haven't done in the past. We've always hosted our own job fairs. So we had a good meeting with the Parkway leadership. So that's set up for next week. I think it's Monday. So they're kind of running it. Their administrators are going to be there. We're just providing the support, the applicant support. So the thought would be that we could streamline that a little bit more. Their administrators can hire on the spot. We can be there for application support so that we can start that hiring process a little bit quicker. So that's kind of our first partner district collaborative hiring event. So we're excited for that. Parkway's been great to work with in that respect. So we'll have a little bit more feedback on how it goes on Monday. We have hosted 3 of our own job fairs at Northview, Southview, and New Owner. Had good turnout on those. And then I do believe we have another one scheduled in Northview kind of later in July.
And Dan, would you say that in the years past, we had more applicants available for those positions than
Yes,
we do at these job fairs now?
Yes.
Like, for instance, we had 25 applicants that come to the job fair which is lower than what we usually had.
Yeah, I mean, it's in another slide, but yes, we're absolutely seeing a significant decline. I think the data from Lynn Safley, who works extensively with pairs, I think we're down a third of applicants here, so it's a struggle. So when someone applies, we're onto them pretty quickly. We're being really proactive, sending out their background information so that we can get that information in. We're being proactive in terms of where do they live, where do they want to work, really trying to hope that brings with an increase in retention, because we know that if we can get a pair a little bit closer to where they live, the likelihood of them staying is probably significantly higher. But, you know, I mean, we are struggling with the current job market for our paraprofessionals, and then the next slide will show you also with our transportation as well.
The other thing is, and I know it's on the board tonight to approve the substitute rates.
Okay.
So that will help the people who are retired who want to come back. We have a higher rate that we're recommending to be more competitive. So recently, paras that have retired or teachers who want to come back and not sub just as a teacher, but can also sub as paraprofessionals too.
I think that sub-rate increase could not have come at a better time.
Yeah, I think the feedback we got was that they appreciated the increase because of the in-person increase for last year, and they were hoping that an increase would come, at least the feedback that I got from the substitutes that I would come in contact when we did school visits. So it's just another layer. It's another opportunity to get people subbing for paraprofessionals, but also our teachers. And the reality is a lot of our paras are the ones that sub for the teacher. To make that para sub attractive, then entices people to come in and sub for the paraprofessional, where a teacher historically might be like, I'm just going to sub for a teacher. So then we can entice them a little bit more to sub for paras so that we can kind of support students that way as well. Next slide, please. So when we look at our student support services data, we've hired 13 social workers, 54 speech paths, 13 school psychs, 4 nurses, 15 OTs, 7 PTs. So when we look at our vacancies in that category, social workers completely filled. Speech path is down to 1. It's at the early childhood level. They're interviewing. Hopefully they'll have a recommendation in this week. School psychs, which is another difficult position to fill. We've hired 1 this morning, so we're down to 5. Nurses, another area that we're struggling with, 12. We talked to Executive Director Wheat. They've prioritized about 5 to 7 of those positions that they would like to have filled, with the other ones kind of dependent on whether students come back from homebound or not. Occupational therapists and physical therapists, we are completely filled in those categories as well. Next slide, please. Some ABA hiring data. We did hire the ABA administrator. We've hired 9 ABA associates. So current vacancies in those categories, obviously, ABA administrators are full. ABA associates, we currently have 10 vacancies in that area. Next slide. So operational staff, hired 19 transportation drivers or monitors. We hired a maintenance, 2 at the distribution center. We've hired 5 clerical. Again, there's the transportation number, 44 total transportation vacancies. Maintenance has 3, down from 4. Distribution center is full, and clerical we have 10. A handful of those are in different levels of interviewing and recommendations, so that number in itself will go down as well. I know in Human Resources we're prepared to make recommendations for hire at the next board meeting, so that number is dropping as well. When we look at transportation hiring, we've hired 6 drivers, 12 monitors, and a dispatcher, leaving us with 22 driver vacancies, 20 actually, hired 1 today, and 23 monitor positions, 0 dispatchers, vacant positions. What's in front of you later, we'll talk about the 610 contract. It's another opportunity, another gesture for us to kind of really stay competitive in the market. You know, we did a lot of good changes for our staff that make us stay competitive in that transportation field. So hopefully that's step 1 in looking at trying to be competitive, remain competitive in a really tight job market for transportation. Next slide, please. Just some kind of updated information for human resources. Next slide, please. So some hiring challenges, obviously COVID barriers. We had limited recruitment fair, and the recruitment fairs were more virtual based. On the teacher side, we were kind of okay with that, just because of, when you're graduating as a teacher, we're attractive and people want to work for us. There's the 1/3 of the applicants that we've received from pre-COVID, so that's really been a drastic drop in the number of applicants. In large part due to a competitive job market. The extended unemployment benefits is ending. We'll see what that contributed to. It definitely had a hindrance. We'll see what that looks like as we get a little farther away from those benefits ending. There's hope that as schools return to a more normal school year, that staff looking to return will also then return to school as it becomes a little bit more of a traditional school year as we get away from some of the restrictions that we had. It's no secret that it was just a tough year for many families in and out of working from home, and so our hope is that as things kind of normalize, that the job market kind of opens back up. Slide, please. So kind of our collaborative response. We've had some really good, solid, consistent communication with our Assistant Executive Director of Partner Districts, Dr. Yates. So really what her and I have been doing is communicating with vacancies and making sure that our administrators are being responsive to our applicants that are reaching out to them, expressing an interest, making sure that they are making, thank you for your email, we're in the hiring process. Because we don't want to lose anyone because they're not engaged, because we're not engaged with them. So that's been a really new partnership. That's been exciting. The applicant pool, kind of the same way. So when we look at our applicant pool, we're consistently reaching out to them, kind of giving them updates, letting them know where our vacancies are so that they can then be proactive as an applicant and reach out to positions that they're interested in with the thought of kind of you're interviewing in districts or positions that you're interested in. With the thought that you're going to be more readily to accept positions that are offered to you, so that we're not then playing kind of one district off of another. So for areas that were short, so for instance, this came really prevalent when we talked about Parkway, really strategizing, prioritizing who we're hiring, what positions we're hiring for, and then we're asking the directors to really look at reassignment for coverage in the event that you can't fill critical positions, so that they can start kind of creating a plan so that they can make sure that their most critical positions are covered.
Are we making sure that individuals, when we're interviewing them or when we're trying to recruit them, let them know that their insurance starts immediately?
Absolutely.
That seems to me is a big thing, because not everybody's doing it.
No, absolutely, and I will tell you, Friday night I got an email from the school psych candidate that we were emailing back and forth, and she was relocating from Chicago. So that kind of created an element of pay difference, right? So we kind of, cost of living, kind of sell that a little bit, and then she asked when benefits started, because she has some health issues, and I said day one, and she accepted Monday. So I'd like to think that played a big part in it. And I think it's the right thing for our employees, and I think it validates.
I think the rest of the board agrees with.
Yeah. So thank you guys for doing that. Next slide, please. So we still utilize Handshake. That's kind of the partner. That's kind of the university model of posting our vacant positions. So we send out our vacancies to a lot of our regional universities. We're seeing a much more increase in our strategic social media advertising. We did enter into an agreement for some billboards, so we kind of strategically placed our billboards. You can see where they're located, really kind of targeting transportation, nursing, and paraprofessionals. So really looking at our positions that are really hard to fill, and really are seeing a significant drop in applicants. It's hard to measure that. Part of it's just getting your name out there and becoming part of the community. I do know one person in transportation mentioned they saw the ad, so it's one more than we had. Again, the para hiring events, we have held 3, new owner, Northview new owner in Southview. We have another one scheduled end of July at Northview. The north area seems to be our biggest draw for applicants, so that's why we're back up there. And then the Parkway one is on Monday, so that obviously is a new one that we don't have included there. Next
My
one.
question regarding
Yes, sir.
drivers. Do we have age limits that we are dealing with
No, sir.
as far as drivers' ages?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I will ask Kenny Moll. I mean, I don't think we have a limit. I don't know if there's an age requirement for the CDL, but I'll tell you what, I can hold that question.
21 to get a CDL.
So,
How about upper ages?
No limit as long as you can pass the physical examination.
I asked that question because something came to mind this past weekend. I was playing golf with some old guys, and one made mention that he was a driver. And because we have the hiring shortages throughout various industries and areas, and he says, you know, old guys like me will show up. I'm not worried about benefits because we're on Social Security, we've got Medicare. What we just want to do is to have something that gives us, you know, 3 or 4 hours a day to be able to be useful. And so I asked that question because he said, you know, whereas that now you got these young kids who are more concerned about whether they make more than what they make sitting at home with unemployment, whereas that those of us our age, that's not an issue. And so that was my reason for asking about the age on this, because maybe there are senior citizens.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be worth targeting some of the art organizations.
I'm sure it wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt, you know.
I mean, we're always, when I say always, looking for opportunities to expand our outreach, whether it's through advertising. I mean, that's something we can get with Jennifer Henry, our Executive Director of Communication, really look at opportunities that maybe we're not kind of targeting. I will say, let me back up, we have had some really good informal kind of initial meetings with the marketing manager that's new to our district, that started in July 1. So really looking at creating kind of 2 things. One, trying to drive up interest to our positions, but also then try to be strategic about it. So we're trying to balance both. One, we know we need to increase our applicants in key areas, but we also want to make sure that we're trying to be strategic without just trying to throw anything on a wall and hoping something sticks. So we're trying to balance those 2 aspects. You know, but at the end of the day, we do need to increase volume of interest and volume of applicants. I do apologize. We'll introduce Dan Thacker, who answered your question. He's the president of 610, which oversees our transportation. He's with us on the next slide. So thanks for answering that. No, you're good now, but thank you for answering that question. Next slide, please. So another strategy that's new, that DESE has made available to partner districts. We'll get a better insight in what this entails at a webinar with the commissioner in early August. But DESE has made available grants to look at retention and recruitment, whether it's grow your own. And again, what you're seeing up there are just kind of highlights of what's available in the grant. We'll get a much more a clearer picture of what that entails when we have session in October and in August, and then we can apply for additional funding. But so, for instance, parent-to-teacher pipeline partnerships with educational prep programs, and then if you look at that number, SSD is about $1 million allocated to special school district to really look at retention and recruitment. And again, some areas that I've highlighted are mentoring programs, hiring, stipends, addressing social emotional needs of our teachers and our staff, professional development opportunities. So that's really a unique opportunity that will get a much clearer picture in early August, so that we can then kind of work with our finance department, work with our communications department, and really kind of create some strategic opportunities to access that grant money to kind of look at recruiting and retention of our current staff. DESE has recognized that this is a shortage across the state. and has addressed it with making funds available to districts. And obviously, our share is larger just because of the size of our district.
I'm interested on that Grow Your Own. Do they have, we attempted that here. It was not overly successful. It's probably 60. And is there a way that they did it different than us? It might have been, you know, that we might have learned something.
When you say they,
I think, Jesse, are there different grants? I was wondering, maybe they did things that were different than what we did. Because when we tried that,
yes, sir.
it just wasn't wasn't very successful.
A lot of the language, when you look at the, again, it's, when you look at their manual, a lot of their Grow Your Own programs are really more geared towards students in high school, and then they kind of promote them into programs. So when we think of Grow Your Own, a lot of
We're
our...
talking about paraprofessionals, teachers, and
yes, sir.
that was just not a real successful program.
I think there's opportunities to improve based on the feedback that we're seeing. You know, I mean, there's the 3 different programs. UMSL is starting a new program, so we met with them. Fontbonne and Webster have master's in teacher programs. So there's opportunities that we can then utilize, not just our pairs that are in special ed programs, but also our pairs that have teaching certs in other fields to encourage them to take the special ed assessment to become certified in special education as well. So there's an opportunity to look at that as well. So we'll have more of an update as we kind of become more familiar. Next slide, please.
So Dan, but we were able to hire 38 of our parents to be teachers this year.
Yes, ma'am. And that's,
last year was about the same.
it's about the same, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And, I mean, we usually, 35 to 40 is usually what we hire, absolutely. And again, we're seeing more, the last 2 that we hired were teachers that had like a history certificate, became a para, liked it, went back, took the special ed assessment, and were able to add special ed onto their certificates, and then we hired them as sped teachers. So it is another avenue that we...
One of the things, though, that we did find is that individuals that we hired from paras and put them to teachers, they had many more problems than many of our new teachers. Whether it was that we were expecting Morrison's that had already been with the district or whatever, when we looked at that, there were problems. Hoping that maybe we can set up more supports for them when they go for teachers.
Well, yeah, absolutely. If we have if we really look at that program, providing support, but I do think the way they're reorganizing the districts with the director, the special ed coordinator, the instructional coach, and when I look at that, I think that's a really good opportunity to provide support so that the director, the special ed coordinators, the instructional coaches are really kind of embedded in that district and can really provide real-time support when it's needed. So, you know, so that's a hope, you know. So
I was just looking at the number. We had more paras who became teachers who had difficulties than new teachers for it.
And I will say it is a little bit more. It works a little bit more in our SSD schools. So to your point, there seems to be, again, not saying it's not out in the partner district, there seems to be a little bit more embedded supports in our SSD schools. So that might be a factor that allows them to be more successful in our SSD schools.
I just wanted to make sure that we supported them.
Oh, yes, sir.
The data showed they were having more problems.
Well, I think we owe it to them as employees. I mean, we owe it to all of our employees, but these are people that have been loyal to us. We've encouraged or supported, and they've taken that leap. And the least we can do is provide the support so that they can be successful.
Yeah.
I have a question. Whenever, after August, after the Dusty August week, I would love to see the breakdown of that, almost, of that $1.1 million.
Sure. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I think it's, Chief Schechter knows the exact date. It's early August. It's a kind of a conference call where people can kind of listen to Desi's presentation, ask questions. So we'll get much more guidance on what's allowed, what's not allowed. So for instance, on the Grow Your Own, a lot of the guidance that they provided has been to high school students, but there is an area that says public service announcements. So is that public service announcement advertising? So there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. So I think once we get a little bit clearer picture of what's allowed, what's expected, then we'd work with finance and really kind of, in communications, and really kind of create a plan that really addresses our critical needs.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not related to this presentation, but I mentor us in tech support here. The three of us got disconnected from the meeting. I think you started. Nobody else, right? You too.
I'm gonna get there.
Well, I was wondering if I take the number. So you tried using the numbers. I haven't tried yet.
While
We
they're
just
doing-
cut you off, that's all.
Yes.
I'll try. This is our.
While they're doing that, you want to show we get started with
Yes.
the last presentation?
Please. Teamsters Local 310 Transportation.
All right,
610.
so we are ratifying, this is probably like our last contract with her.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Whew. Yay. Thank you.
That's what I say, too.
This is our 610 Teamsters, local and, transportation, so welcome to both, to Dana Kelly.
Yes, please.
Next one.
Thank you again. My name is Dean Kelly. Want to introduce.
My name's Dan Thacker. I'm Secretary, Treasurer, Principal Officer at Teamsters Local 610, and the business representative for special school district drivers and aides and the maintenance and warehouse workers.
Anything else there, Dan?
No, that's about it.
A lot.
So on the district representative side, we have myself, Director Ken Mulder, Manager Robin Ray, Manager Kevin Knuckles.
And on our side, we had myself, shop stewards on the negotiating committee were Cindy Kinetic, Pat Brookfield, Andy, I always butcher her name, Stauskilko, or Mike Siegman, Sherry Casey, and Tracy Engelmeyer.
Next slide, please. So this was a traditional collective bargaining, so where the other groups did a little bit more interest-based. This was more traditional collective bargaining, and we looked at language and also salary. Next slide, please. So kind of the duration, it is a 2-year contract. So kind of the big picture items from each article. So in Article 5, we really eliminated Step 2 in the grievance process. Through the conversations, we realized that Step 1 and Step 2 were very similar, and it was just drawing out if an employee had a concern, it was drawing out the process. So we kind of condensed Steps 1 and 2. In Article 7, what we really wanted to look at is if there was a concern with a driver or monitor, that concern would be in place for a school year, not necessarily a calendar year. So we thought that was an opportunity to address concerns, and while looking at it as a school year, 9 months instead of 12. And then we also said they had a provision in there that they had to call if they were sick 60 minutes in advance. We reduced that to 30 because some of our staff were getting there super early, and what we were finding is we weren't even there to take the call, but we were holding them to a standard that we weren't even there to take it. So we reduced that down to 30 minutes. And then Article 8 really looks at, so essentially if 2 employees have the same seniority date, there would be a shop steward present when we literally drew it out of a hat, which was new to me, but then a lot of that seniority is for bidding routes, so that's pretty important. So that was something new to me, so that was important. So Article 9 is a really big article and looks at their guarantees. So we made a lot of changes to protect weekly bid hours when route changes or calendar modifications occur. So our staff are paid on guarantees. So what we wanted to make sure that if a calendar change was made, that our drivers and our monitors, their guarantees were still protected to no fault of their own. Sorry, there's a bug up here. So we also then guaranteed 5-hour standbys equal to regular workforce eligibility for additional work. So essentially, really supporting our standby drivers that are kind of available to cover routes. If someone's sick, they're there kind of to fill that gap in. So we want to make sure that they're eligible for additional work, just like the regular workforce. So for instance, we aligned our inclement weather with other work groups. So for instance, if central office is closed, what does that look like for our drivers, making sure that they're compensated accordingly if they have to come in, if our central office is closed. We did revise ESY language, allowing for employees to take time off. So what we found out is a lot of our veteran staff are really, they save appointment. They don't want to miss time. They know how important their job is, so they save it for the summer, but then we had language that said they couldn't take any time off during the summer. So we thought it was reasonable that, if someone had a doctor's appointment, then we understand, and so we didn't want to prevent them from working summer school because they had a couple doctor's appointments. So we revised the contract. Next slide, please. Employee benefits, again, starting on day one, big change. We also then really looked at, this was important for our recruitment and retention, making sure that all employees are paid 4 days over winter break. So before it used to be just a certain, if you worked 4 or 5 years.
Over 5 years.
Right. So we thought it was important for retention that all of our employees, whether you've been here 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or whatever, receive that same benefit that was afforded to our other drivers. We also, this one was one that the drivers really and monitors really were interested in, and is really kind of tiering their discretionary days based on years of service. So we kind of agreed to that. So we kind of accepted having different tiers of available time based on your years of service. We also increased non-discretionary days for inclement weather, so that if there was a day that a district was closed, that a bus driver or monitor could use an inclement weather day and still receive compensation. Because before, they wouldn't unless they had to then utilize their paid time off to get paid. So I know that was a big change that was, again, laying the foundation for recruitment and retention. Article 12 was simply adding sick bus. We had activity bus, late bus. We just didn't have sick bus, so we added making sure that we had sick bus into different layers of routes.
What's the
When
same
is a sick bus?
So if a student is sick and has to get home, we would send a bus. And technically, we were obviously compensating employees for it, but if technically it wasn't in the contract that a sick bus, you would receive additional compensation for it. So
Right, or how it would be dispatched and who it would be dispatched to. It was just something, it really come up more, I think, during COVID this year than ever in the past, especially with quarantines being placed on kids and coming in contact with someone. All of a sudden we'd get calls, Johnny needs to be picked up from such and such school, and how we administered dispatching that and who was going to take that route was a problem, so we thought we'd clarify it in the contract.
Is it being clarified so it's all done by seniority now?
It's bid out the same as the activities bus, midday runs and all that, so we just kind of put it under that same classification. So there's no confusion on who should have been awarded the work.
So there's procedures for it?
Correct.
And then we modified staffing requirements for safety based on student equipment, so number of wheelchairs, number of harnesses. And then we added some collaborative language. I know in years past, Chief Hogg worked with 610 to kind of, when COVID was really kind of shutting things down, what that would look like for our drivers and monitors. So we just kind of thought it was important to add some language in there that said, as districts potentially look at different things, like a snow day is a virtual day. Well, staff work, but bus drivers don't. So we thought it was more than fair and honored our staff to say that if that starts happening more, that we would then sit back down together, collaboratively come up with how do we support our current staff if school districts start doing some virtual learning. Because, that's the reality of it. Bus drivers, if they're not driving, they're not getting paid. So we thought, we would add that so that we could kind of work through any issues that come up. It was hard to predict anything and everything, so we just thought this clause would allow us to come back and try to do what's right for our employees.
And prior to the virtual learning aspect all kicking in during COVID, different schools would have a different schedule, be it a 180-day work schedule, or a lot of them have switched to hours now, but drivers were basically guaranteed, say, 180 days of work per school year. So if there were 5 snow days and the school built in 4 snow days, they would make up 1 day at the end of the year. They still achieved their 180 days. But when the whole virtual learning deal kicked in, and it's a problem I'm having with all the bus shops that I represent, is, there's a big fear with the drivers that all of a sudden, every time there's a flake of snow, they're gonna call virtual learning day, and all of a sudden, we're gonna be down, we're not gonna ever make up a day. And versus making 180 days pay or so a year, we're gonna make 150 days pay a year. We just can't survive on it. And I think it's really hurting recruiting in the busing industry.
Has that been a factor for other districts as well in St. Louis County?
Yes.
And is that something that other districts are also?
I'm looking at it on all my contracts. Yeah, I mean, I've only negotiated, this is only the second bus contract I've negotiated since the whole COVID deals come to light, but I mean, I've had memorandums of understandings with other districts and stuff that, to get us through the last school year, so.
And that's what we had before, an MOU, and we just thought it would be a little bit more formal to kind of embed it into our contract.
One of the things that comes to mind, that same old guy I was playing golf with, he worked in the maintenance department at the large institution that my wife worked at. And in the conversation, he mentioned to me that there basically were 4 families that constituted the majority of the labor force for that particular institution. And it was more nepotism than anything in reference to the hiring. And in maintenance, they had like 48 employees. And he asked, do we have any African Americans employed out of the 48? There were none. He says, and the reason was basically because none of the Americans were part of the families. I was looking at your negotiating team, and I know that none on our side are. Are any of the people who represented the negotiations for you in this situation African American?
Yes. Pat Brookfield was, and who was the other one? There was 2 of them on there, I believe. I have, what we do an election for our shop stewards through the board. We actually have more shop stewards than we have negotiating committee because you couldn't possibly bring all our shop stewards in and actually sit down and reasonably negotiate a contract. So then we take the highest vote getters out of the election process for the shop stewards, and then they're awarded the top 5 or 6 positions are awarded the negotiating team committee. And that's the way it works. I currently have, I believe, 3 or 4 African-American black shop stewards. One of them, Pat Brookfield, was one of the highest vote getters, and she was on the negotiating committee. And I'm sorry, I was thinking there was another one, but that was it. It was just the one.
Okay.
And that's
And one male and all females.
And that's
And just some continuation of that question, out of your total number of union people, what percentage does African Americans make up in reference to your?
If I would have to guess, I would say it's pretty close to 50-50 in that shop, but that's strictly a guess. I mean, we have a really good mix there.
Okay.
More women than men, which is kind of traditional in bus driving industry. Race is really equal, I think. But like I say, it's just throwing a number out there from who's at union meetings and stuff and who I deal with on a regular basis. There's a lot of members who don't participate in meetings, and they just,
And I was just asking that question based upon the hiring and trying to find individuals to fill the vacancies. So I was just making sure that, that we're talking about a collective scenario of individuals.
Absolutely. I think this district does as well as any district or better in that case scenario as far as hiring. And, with the labor shortage you guys are having, I was sitting back watching Dan's presentation. Believe me, that's not unusual. Matter of fact, you guys are faring a little better than most of the other districts I represent. Rockwood's in a world of hurt. There's some things they need to entertain, a few issues. I represent them, and there's a few issues there that are hurting, but they're in a much more dire situation than you guys are.
Okay.
I have a couple things that I'm personally beginning to kind of work on. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar, but with the new American Rescue Plan Act, pension funds were shored up. I have a lot of truck drivers that participate in the Central States Pension Fund. It's one of the biggest pension funds in the country. And it was due to go insolvent in 5 years. That's now been saved. So I'm having a large influx now that people are confident that their pension's good, of people retiring at a younger age. They all currently carry CDLs. And that particular pension fund prohibits anyone from working within the industry for the first year of their retirement, excluding bus driving. So they can retire immediately to become a bus driver. Now, with that said, not everyone wants to retire and go to work. We know that's, but I'm pursuing that avenue myself, trying to kind of push some of our future retirees into maybe getting on as a bus driver. And, believe me, you guys, your district's the first one I'm sending them to. I mean, we had great negotiations. I think they got a great contract. I think you guys are very fair and equitable with your employees. And as I get people looking for jobs, I refer them all the time.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Rockwood, too.
Well, me and Paul Northington have our next meeting. I might be sending a few people.
And I'll finish up quickly. Next slide, please. And Dan wasn't going to talk at all, so this worked.
Yeah, sorry, I butt in.
So we also looked at performance and attendance bonuses, performance being safety and attendance being show up. So we increased both of those for the drivers and the monitors to reward our staff on a monthly basis for showing up and also being safe. Next slide.
Every month?
Yes.
Monthly.
Okay.
So for 21-22 school year, step movement for all eligible employees, step adjustment, increased money on the step for a little over $222,000 increase. Overall, it was a 3.45 increase to forecasted expenditures. Total cost, $6,659,700. Year two, next slide, please, sorry. Year two, again, step movement again for all eligible employees. Step adjustment, added money to the step for an increased cost of about $223,000 for about a 3.36% increase to forecasted expenditures for a total cost of about $6.8 million. Next slide, please. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, would someone like to make a motion to approve the consensual items, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All right. Action items, bid and award approval. I'd like to make a motion to approve bid and award approval, please.
There's an vote.
Oh, we need to vote on these special items. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Bid and, action items, bid and award approval. Someone would like to make a motion to approve bid and award approval.
Second.
Got any questions?
Yes. I think I called and asked for information pertaining to some of the bids that we're issuing and what those kind of bids look like and cost. How many of them have we been able to fill with black and minority contracts?
So that is something that we are still continuing to work on as we talk about that in the spring. We got into a busy season where we wrap up the year with purchasing and everything else, but that is still that report that we are going to put together. And as we bring those goals back for you, we'll start to bring back some of the other items with designated MBEs and WBEs on those sheets as well. We just haven't made that change yet.
So you say that you'll put that together and get it back to me, get it back to us approximately.
I was thinking early fall, so
Yeah,
September.
September, we're gonna do that report on the the bid process and.
Okay. Do we have our bids broken down, say example, how much do we spend on plumbing annually? Or is it broken down to the degree as to those services that we contract out? And what those services tend to be on a repetitive basis?
We do have some blanket purchase orders that we look at, where we do use certain, companies through that process. It would be something we would have to run. We don't have that available right now.
Any other questions? I need a vote on this. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, the MOU and with Normandy Collaborative. Would someone like to make a motion to approve?
I have a question on that in reference to the.
Second.
We got a first and a second. All right, it's all yours.
Okay. What was that? Had we looked at that before as far as the memorandum of understanding with them? What was that containing?
So what we did this year is, we have to spend a certain amount of money with disproportionality. And so we evenly split up per student for this next year, roughly $5.2 million. Where this comes in is, with work through Chiquita McBriddle with the districts, this is, as we talked about through the budget process, those tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So when we worked with each district and was able to secure and provide staffing support, that came from that $5.2 million. Where this is coming from is money that was not spent this year, that was earmarked for disproportionality. So basically carryover money, we decided that, with districts being tier 2 and tier 3 and needing some extra support, we've allowed them to identify areas that they can really use some extra support in. And so what they're going to do is they're going to hire, in this case, 2 positions, and they'll bill us back. And what we wanted to do is we had never put that in writing before. So what we wanted to do was put that in an MOU this year to spell out exactly what that was and what we'd be reimbursing for.
Okay.
Yeah, and we met with the superintendent and their assistant superintendent, the liaison, with Normandy. And both of these positions, one will be a coordinator and one will be an instructional coach. They have a lot of initiatives going on in Normandy right now, and so they just felt we already provided them with the instructional coaches, and they wanted to hire another one. These funds are going to be utilized in that fashion for that, through the disproportionality funds. Yep. So we might see this going forward with a lot more as the districts are utilizing the disproportionality funds as opposed to us hiring the people. It really puts it back and the ownership on within the partner districts, because these really need to be used for gen ed activities to support students to prevent them from going into special.
Any other questions on this? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Someone like to make a motion for a closed meeting of the Board of Education
So moved.
on July 20th and August 10th at 7 p.m. So moved. Is there a second? I hear on that. Meredith did. Okay, need a roll call on this one.
Director Adams?
Yes.
Director Byers? Director Faulkner? Director Hudson? Vice President Petrov? Yes. And President Kuhn?
Yes. All right. Someone like to make a motion on the approval of minutes of our last meetings?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. The following items were approved during the June 22nd executive meeting: employment, resignations, retirement, salary adjustments, extra duty pay, and vacancy pay. Reemployment of administrative staff. Employment of miscellaneous business professional staff. Request for contract release of teacher level staff. One settlement agreement. A one-time board paid stipend. I say that because the board did not get a stipend. This is the, every time I say that, I'm thinking the board did not get the stipend. And the superintendent contract. All right. Unless, Judith, you weren't at the last, meeting for the policy, did you get your session? Okay, for the calendar of events, I'd ask everybody to take a look. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.